family of shows. Available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of the show, we are going to be concluding our positional rankings for Week 12 with our defense and special teams units. This is a position group that I feel has gone underestimated and underrespected from a fantasy standpoint this season. I tried to tell you about this position beforehand, but I feel like this is still a position group that gets a lot of flack just because they're not the prettiest part about building a fantasy football team. However, these defenses this season have proven that if you're tough, if you're physical, in real life you can win football games, and potentially in fantasy you can do good things as well. And also, special teams is coming to light a little bit this year. We know that the defenses have looked really good, but how about some special teams units really stepping up these past couple of weeks? And I'm really excited to talk about this bunch because these are a lot of diverse defenses that, maybe haven't won a lot of games or maybe are in prime position to clinch playoff spots pretty soon. All of them are just fun defenses who can generate points in real life and fantasy in many different ways. So without further ado, let's jump right into our final positional rankings of the week with my defense and special teams units. Starting off with the defense and special teams unit we mentioned in our last segment, kind of in a more negative manner than we ever have in the show, but Brock Bowers is a special player. But I still think the Broncos defense is going to shut down this Raiders offense outside of Brock Bowers. I do hope that Brock Bowers has a good game for fantasy's sake for all of you out there who own him. But I still think that the Broncos are just a vaunted defense. And even though we saw signs of life from this Raiders offense with the OC change, I just think the Broncos are a heater, man. They're a really special football team on both sides of the football. The offense really complementing this defensive play well. Bo Nix finally rounding into his own, looking like perhaps the offensive rookie of the year if Jaden Daniels continue to slide. But let's talk about the defense, man. As I always say, you may not be able to name many of the players on this defense, but they play like one of the best in the National Football League. Whether it be Riley Moss and Jaquan McMillian on the back end, Cody Barton and Alex Singleton at the linebacker position, Zach Allen up front, this is a defense of studs. And you don't even have to know their names to know that they've been being pretty consistent from a fantasy standpoint. 12 fantasy points last week against Atlanta. Kind of shocking considering the fact that they held them to 6 points, but it is what it is from a fantasy standpoint. And in some different leagues, potentially they scored higher, but it doesn't matter because this defense, I know, is special. And so I can't pass up the opportunity against an offense that I think can start to get going, but just, hasn't been consistent enough to sway me and convince me that against opposing defenses like the Broncos that they can put up points. So look for the Broncos defense to yet again continue to pleasantly surprise people. And then the second defense, this is kind of a matchups-oriented one, but this defense I feel like is going to get going on the stretch here because this is a very interesting team to monitor on the stretch of the season. They feel like they can be in contention to potentially snag a wild card spot, if not their division. And so this is one that I really think can ramp up the intensity in their style of play and really remind people of what they can be going forward. And that is the Bucs defense. This is their easiest test to date coming up after the bye against the Giants team that has benched Daniel Jones and is starting Tommy DeVito, who I still love, but we know he's not necessarily the best option right now for the Giants. And so I feel like this Bucs team got this bye at the perfect time for them to get healthy. Mike Evans potentially coming back for this one as well. And all of these defensive players as well coming back. They suffered a lot of injuries in that last game against the Chiefs on the defensive side of the football and still were able to shut down this squad. And shut down that squad to certain effect, mind you. So coming up after this bye, in perhaps their easiest remaining game on the schedule, look for the Bucs to get right again. And I'm not going to say that this is a game that's going to really get them going because, like I said, They have a very tough schedule. I'm going to pull it up right now because it is perhaps the most brutal down the stretch for any team. Actually, it isn't. I keep on mixing up certain teams, saying that they have tough schedules, but the Bucks actually have one of the easier schedules. Now that I look at it, they have games against the Panthers still. They have games against the Saints still. So this is a very manageable schedule, and coming up after the bye will prove that, and will hopefully get this defense going because I know what they're capable of on that side of the football. I love all the players they have. It's just a matter of getting them in the right mindset to make that playoff push because I know they can down the stretch. And sorry for that mix-up, but they do have the schedule to do it. So look for the Bucks to get going in this one against New York. Then the Packers. Let's talk about their defense because I always want to include a defense with a harder matchup than people think. And going up against the 49ers team that, yes, still has questions and concerns about the status of Brock Purdy. He did end up in the injury report, seen as day-to-day with his arm. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. But I feel like this Packers defense is a defense that I've kind of disrespected a lot this season, but I still have to appreciate what they do for you. In terms of generating takeaways, they're one of the best teams in terms of a fantasy perspective in that regard. So I feel like in this one, should Purdy not play, look for, and I actually don't know who their backup QB is, so I'm going to look for whoever the backup QB is. I'm going to pull up right now. Brandon Allen, hopefully. I feel like is going to have a lot of turnovers in him in this game. Hopefully Purdy does play in this game, and we get a nice little shootout here in the NFC. But if not, then this match for the Packers gets a little bit easier. That being said, I still think that Shanahan will find a way to make this a tough matchup. So I did want to kind of give this matchup a little bit more balance because these last two, I feel like, are easy picks in terms of a fantasy standpoint. So I wanted this to be more of the tougher test for this defense. But I still think the Packers D, whether it's Purdy or not, will stand out and shine in this week's matchup. And then last but not least, I'm going to pick a sleeper team here, something I haven't really done in terms of my positional ranking. I always pick 4 defenses that I feel should be viable starts for you week in, week out, whether it be based off matchup or just based off performance. But this team, I can't really pin down because I'm looking at this matchup on paper and I'm saying, well, this team should win this game. But then again, I think about the Texans and what they've done on the outside of the football. They haven't really convinced me that they can win games handily against opponents like the Titans. And that's why I'm saying the Titans defense could be a sleeper pick this week. I feel like, in games where they feel overmatched, they've really held their own and risen to the occasion. And they may not necessarily be the most appealing option out there from a fantasy perspective, but I respect them because of what they've been able to do to compensate for the ineptitudes of this team and organization overall. I look at the things they do to stand out and differentiate themselves from other bottom-feeding teams and their defenses. They really hone in on the run game as well. And while I said that Joe Mixon could be one of the better starts of the week for you at the running back position, it's going to be a tough task. Because when I look at the Texans offense, he really is the focal point right now. He really is what makes this offense tick. Maybe Nico Collins get going again after his injury, but he really is going to have to carry the load for this Texans team. And if the Titans are intent on shutting down that part of the game and forcing CJ Stroud to make plays, that's where this kind of becomes an uncomfortable game for the Houston Texans. Because Stroud this season has proven that, yes, in stretches and spurts, he can look like the elite quarterback he was last season. But, much like last season, when he played teams who actually wanted to generate pressure on him, he struggled mightily. And so, I'm looking for in this game whether or not the Titans can limit Joe Mixon just a tiny bit and focus on getting to CJ Stroud, because if CJ Stroud gets pressured, then potentially this Titans D can make things happen. I really admire them just because, as a team that's not contending this season, they really have made those games tough for opposing teams. Last week against the Vikings, a couple other games, their division as well, they've made very tough. And so this is a team that can bring a surprise if this defense really gets going and does what it does best. So let me know what you think in the comments, because I try to respect all the defenses in the NFL, whether it be based off matchups or whether it be based off performance. Like I said, defense is starting to prove very important to how you build a fantasy football roster. And you want to have a good one, especially now as we're heading towards the fantasy playoffs. They're seemingly right around the corner, so you want to prepare for that, and you might want to do it through locking down a solid defense. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. But coming up to conclude today's show, as always, one of my favorite segments of the week, my weekly Shadow Report, the key wide receiver, cornerback matchups that will define the week from a fantasy football perspective. We'll be right back to conclude today's show with that exciting segment.